felt that the citizens weren't really having viable opportunities to participate in the budget process. Specifically, their participation was limited to a public hearing near the end of the budget process. Some of you may have been at those public hearings down at City Hall. The council chambers are filled and each speaker has about 2 minutes to say what they want to say, and then they have to sit down and let the next person speak. And that, of course, can take several hours, but that's been the recent history of citizen participation in the budget process, which some people feel, CCR specifically, isn't really much of an opportunity to influence things, because among other things, when the city manager turns over the budget to the city council, say around the 1st of December, and the city council has to adopt that budget before the end of the year, that's really not a lot of time for a lot of deliberation, much less providing substantive input from the citizens. And so CCR decided that they would, instead of waiting to the last minute, the 12th hour, instead launch their own process, the citizen budget process, to go out in the community, hold meetings, I believe, in 4 of the community centers, and invite people to come in and work through a series of options that were presented and developed by the city, which was very useful. It was helpful, I felt. One of the problems being that the choices rather were forced. You could only pick a 0 reduction or a 10% reduction or a 15% reduction or a 20% reduction in 10 categories of expenditures. And you were similarly given an opportunity to increase revenues in 5 categories. So it was good, but it was limited. The targeting, though, is useful because it really forced people to deal with those hard questions. Some of those 10 categories included health. Do you want to cut public health? How about police, fire, neighborhood activities, specifically neighborhood development? How about rec centers? Do you want to cut those? On the revenue side were increase that earnings tax by some amount. Again, that's the big revenue source of the general fund. Second, increase the property tax. A third one was to institute an admissions tax at theaters and Bengals, Reds games, those sorts of activities, or when concerts come to town, have an admissions tax for that. So people I went to a couple, and I think it was at least an hour and a half, perhaps 2 hours, where people diligently worked through that process of looking at what the cuts could be and what the increases in revenues would be. And just as an aside on the increases in revenues, the city council cannot unilaterally increase revenues, with the exception of that famous property tax rollback, if you're familiar with that. That's an opportunity for them to, if they would change that rollback policy, they could increase property tax revenues by, I think, $6 million, which relative to the $28 million that's already brought in would be a big increase, but relative to the contribution that the property taxes make to the general fund, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. Who am I to speak? My ox would not be that gored, I guess, by that change. But an increase to an admissions tax would have to take a vote, I believe. An increase to the earnings tax similarly would require votes through a referendum. And is there anybody who wants to bet on the opportunity that taxpayers would take to vote those down? I don't